Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. We're going to explore the ancient mystery traditions of Greece and Egypt today. With me is P. Sufenas Virius Lupus, who is a practitioner of polytheism and a scholar of ancient religions. He is the author of The Serpent Path Primer and Ephesia Grammata, Ancient History and Modern Practice. Also, under his legal name of Phillip Bernhardt-House, he is the author of Werewolves, Magical Hounds, and Dog-Headed Men in Celtic Literature. He teaches in the social science faculty of Skagit Community College in Whidbey Island, Washington. Welcome, Lupus.
Thank you so much. It's really wonderful to be here.
And it's a pleasure to be with you as well. The mystery traditions of Greece in particular are almost unknown today. I guess it's one of the reasons we call them the mystery traditions. They're still regarded as mysterious. And the thing that really intrigues me is that in ancient times, every person of any social standing was initiated into these traditions.
Right. And I think something important to realize about mystery traditions is that we tend to think of mystery as, most people would say, a genre of literature, right? Yes. Who done it? Yeah. Who's really behind all of it? It's a guessing game. It's something that's revealed step by step. The important thing to remember about the ancient context is that what to the Greeks was mysteria, to the Romans, their translation for that was initiatio, so initiation. Mm. And what it really is it's an experience. It's not so much that the information revealed in a particular ritual was the important thing. The experience of it in a ritual context that made it personal for the people taking part is what's really essential. So it's kind of, I suppose, an epistemological difference. It's experiential knowledge as opposed to propositional knowledge.
Well, two things come to mind about these traditions. First, we have the word hermetically sealed. Yep. In modern culture, it's a technological term for a pure, perfect vacuum seal, right. For example, an impenetrable seal. And yet it's named after the god Hermes, who was the initiator of the ancient mystery traditions, the psychopomp, one who led one into the mysteries. And people were required to keep the secret of the mysteries upon pain of death.
Right. And I think one of the reasons for that has been discussed amongst a lot of modern practitioners is not so much whatever happened there was a big secret, so much as what we would now call spoiler alert, right? You don't talk about it until you've gone through it, because there are so many things that could be talked about, but until you've done it, it doesn't really have the same impact. So if you know what's going to happen ahead of the time, it's not going to be as effective.
With regard to particular rituals.
Exactly.
Well, I understand that, at least minimally speaking, we know quite a bit about the procedures leading up to the great ritual and the procedures following the great ritual. And we know from the testimony of people who have been through the ritual, while they didn't reveal particulars, they, as I understand it, would say they no longer fear death. They now know something about the immortality of the human soul.
Right. So that's a very common, I think, across the board for most of the mystery traditions, something that happens. The effect of it is undergoing the experience, in essence, is a kind of dress rehearsal for death, you might say.
Well, To be specific, in Greece we have the Eleusinian mysteries and the Orphic mysteries.
Right.
And those, I suspect, were derived possibly from the Egyptians.
If not derived from, then definitely highly influenced by. There were similarities noticed by the Greeks quite immediately with the mysteries of Osiris and Isis, and then the mysteries of Demeter and Persephone. And in many respects, there's a lot of points of contact between them.
And all of these legends, we have the myths, they involve a journey into the underworld.
Yeah, that's a very, very common part of this. If an underworld journey, in essence, is a kind of death, then that's what's involved in most of them. All the way going back to things like the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the so-called Book of the Dead, the Book of Coming Forth by Day, in Egyptian tradition, as well as other afterlife texts that they had, which maybe weren't afterlife texts, descriptions of the afterlife, so much as descriptions of rituals, and then kind of crib notes on the walls of crypts and that were buried with people to remind them, this is what's going to happen to you. You know what the procedure is. When you meet this person, you say this thing, and so forth, which is something that also happens in the Orphic, or at least some strands of the Orphic mysteries. They have found a number of plates, usually inscribed on gold, that have been buried with people that describe something that happens in the underworld, of arriving there and coming to a white cypress tree. And there is a spring flowing by the side of the white cypress, and you're going to be very thirsty, but by no means drink from that spring. Go past it, and some texts say to the left, some say to the right, and you get to some guardians before another spring, and that's the spring of mnemosyne, the spring of memory. If you drink from the earlier spring, it's the spring of lethe, the spring of forgetfulness.
I see.
So when you drink from before you can drink from the spring of memory, you have to say something to the guardian. And these vary from tablet to tablet, but often what a part of it is I am a child of earth and starry heaven, but my soul is of heaven alone. That's how it's often translated, but what's really saying is, I am a child of Gaia and starry Oranos. And then it goes on to say, my race is of the gods, you yourselves know this. Quickly give to me a drink from the cold spring of mnemosyne, and show me to Persephone, that I might be in the company of other initiates and so forth. So that gets the person a special place in the afterlife that isn't the dreary eating dust, aspect that is found in Homer and so forth, with the descent of Odysseus into Hades.
Well, in Homer, we have a different tradition where Odysseus goes into an underground temple, and there he meets the oracle who is able to communicate with the spirits of the dead. And in that Greek tradition, these are like shades. They're like pale reflections of what they once were when they were alive. And they're so desperate to talk to a living human being that they begin flooding through. And Odysseus is no longer able to, I think he went there to commune with Achilles, but was unable to because all the spirits come flooding through.
Right.
That's rather different than the mystery school tradition, would you say?
Definitely. And I think that there certainly are surviving what are called necromanteons that are cave-based
underground temples that were designated places for communing with the spirits of the departed.
Right. And some of them were even said in myth to be how, for example, Heracles descended to the underworld to bring Cerberus up. In modern-day Turkey along the Black Sea, there's a place called Heraclea Pontica, where there's one of these necromanteons that's in a cave, and that's said to be where that happened. So you get a little bit of both. It may not just be a temple, it may also actually be a direct way there, but whether that's physical or strictly spiritual, the effect is the same.
Well, I guess we have to appreciate that the ancient cultures had a much more well-integrated understanding of a vast range of spiritual and psychic functions.
Right.
Including communion with the dead, but that the mystery traditions, as you're describing it, has a little bit more to do, not so much with reaching out to communicate with the departed, but lifting oneself up into the realm of the gods.
Yeah, in many respects, that's essentially what some of the Orphic tablets end with is, and you yourself will become an immortal. I suspect that that's probably what happened in the Eleusinian mysteries as well. And of course, in the Egyptian afterlife texts, what ultimately happens is the deceased is identified usually with Osiris and then gets to be in a special part of the afterlife.
Well, and as I understand it, the earliest versions of the pyramid texts were probably written for the pharaoh, who was already regarded as a divine being. And so this is instructions for the divine being of the pharaoh how to claim his rightful place in the heaven of Osiris, the afterlife upon death.
Right.
That it was, even though the pharaoh was a divine being, he was also human and needed this instruction.
Right.
And then perhaps over time, this cult began to be more inclusive of others, people of status beside just the pharaoh.
Right, and eventually very, very democratized so that any individual could partake of it. When we get to the period of the Papyrus of Ani, which is the best known version of the so-called Book of the Dead, the Book of Coming Forth by Day. The other versions of it that we have seem to indicate that you could go to a scribe and say, I would like the standard A version plus spells 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So you get variation in the texts based on what kinds of spells are included, what sorts of things that person maybe wanted to do in the afterlife. And this process kind of eventually, for various different reasons, just becomes something available to anyone, and in theory then, something that is technically everyone's birthright. Everyone as a human has the same soul parts and therefore capacities, and can thus achieve some state of continued existence.
Well, you know, most people, I think, regard the ancient pyramids of Egypt as tombs.
Right.
I've been there, and one of the striking features of the pyramids is that unlike all of the royal tombs, there's no artwork.
Right.
None whatsoever, and it occurred to me that the pyramids, particularly the Great Pyramids, were initiation chambers.
Right.
I had the experience, for example, of lying down inside the sarcophagus, which is a big granite sarcophagus, in the king's chamber of the Great Pyramid, and I experienced an altered state of consciousness at that time. It's like sort of flying into space.
Right.
And many, many people who I've spoken to who had that experience of being in that sarcophagus report a very, very similar, almost identical altered state of consciousness.
Right. And this is something that Jeremy Nadler has written about in a number of different books, including Shamanic Wisdom in the Pyramid Texts, that shamanism, whether it's a term that is a good one to use or not, is nonetheless the term that we have to understand this, and that those were initiation rituals which were done, and a big part of Egyptian, and some strands of Greek mystery traditions is what we could call astral apotheosis, that you, if not at least go to the heavens, you become your own star. So that definitely would fit with that. If the entire pyramid complex there is meant to facilitate you becoming a star, well, then it worked. So just remember what happened there, and you too may become your own star.
Well, and the myths of Osiris, the myths of Persephone and Demeter, the myths of Orpheus, all involve a kind of death and rebirth. Even the earlier myths of Inanna in Assyria, they're almost... well, I don't want to say every, but in many, many ancient traditions, this theme of death and rebirth is very significant, and I suspect related to the idea of initiations into the mysteries.
Yes, exactly. I think that seems to be, if you could generalize about a lot of these traditions, it is a rehearsal for death. So the way that they understand death in that particular cultus, and what is the possibility if everything goes well for you, that's what you're practicing for. So that then when the moment of death comes, you'll be ready for it. It won't be confusing to you and so forth. Although some of the texts do account for that as well. I believe it's Plutarch who writes about it's like an initiation. First there's confusion and running around, and then eventually there is illumination. So even if you do it right, it's probably a rough journey. But I think that birth is a rather rough journey as well. So it seems that the other end of the process would match it.
Now, it's intriguing that Christianity is based on that fundamental myth of death and rebirth, and yet I think with the rise of Christian culture, we see the extinction of the Greek and Egyptian mystery religions.
Right, and I think, ultimately what that has to do with is when Christianity achieved political hegemony, it then wanted to eliminate all of the other contenders. If you can get this from somebody else, there's no reason to opt into our cult. And, but that having been said, they did have tremendous influence from other mystery religions, and many of the patristic fathers in the early centuries of Christianity, like Clement of Alexandria, for example, who lived in the late 2nd, early 3rd century. He writes a lot about the mysteries specifically to discredit them, to say that this is nonsense and that what we're doing is the better version. So sometimes what is preserved in Clement might actually be legitimate information that could help us to understand the mysteries, but he's a hostile witness, so to speak, so we have to remember that.
Well, you are, amongst other things, a student of medieval literature. My understanding is that in medieval Christian culture, there arose a movement referred to as the art of dying. People began to find ways of preparing for death.
Right.
It would seem to be kind of a rebirth of mystery school idea.
It's very interesting you bring that up, because there is a number of literary texts which attest to something that was probably historical that took place in Ireland, referred to as St. Patrick's Purgatory. And essentially it was a cave in a crack in the rocks on an island in a lake. And you could go there would be a big preparation of fasting and prayers and so on at a nearby monastery. Then you would go there and you would spend the night in the cave, and you would have all of the pains of purgatory while you were still alive, so that then when you died, you didn't have to go through purgatory. And one of the most interesting things about that particular ritual is that in many ways that I think are almost beyond the possibility of coincidence, it matches a mystery tradition / oracle practice called the Cave of Trophonius in Greece, where somebody prepared for several days beforehand. They went into this cave, they stayed overnight, and then when they came out of it, they drank the waters of memory there, and then they told what happened to them. The interesting thing about that one is that whatever effect it had for the person, one thing that was said of them afterwards is that they would never smile again. And so that's a very interesting kind of counterpoint to the idea that mystery initiates have great hope and faith and so forth, that they will survive into the afterlife and everything will be fine. People who went through that one, whatever their experience was, kind of took the shine off of life for them.
Oh.
So that's kind of interesting.
Well, I suppose maybe it has to do with the cultural context.
Very much, yeah. I mean, there isn't a great deal of information on that particular mystery cultus, but there are so many of them.
Well, in ancient Greece, the most prominent, I believe, was the Eleusinian mysteries. And my understanding is that the preparation for the great ritual had a lot to do with Greek theater at the time. One would watch performances, and often the performances included comedy and satire and almost perhaps even Dionysian orgiastic festivities.
Right. Well, both Dionysus, or I should say Dionysus is involved in both the Eleusinian as well as the Orphic mysteries.
And he's the god of wine.
Right, but also the god of ecstasy. The god of, people don't realize that the connection between acting and drunkenness is that both of them take you out of yourself.
Yes.
When a good actor loses themselves in the part, and when you're drunk, you have that experience of ecstasis. So any altered state like that is something that Dionysus could be involved with.
But the ancient Greeks had a high culture, and they had drama, they had philosophy, they had some science, and I'm under the impression that in designing the mystery traditions at the peak of the height of Athens, the greatest city in the world at that time, the envy of the whole world, according to some writers, that they brought all of their civilization to bear on this ritual, which was it was literally a requirement for all of the leaders of society.
Right. Yeah. I think that if nothing else, probably the production values and the special effects of the ritual would have been the highest available. But that's not to say that it's all just a stage show. I think that's the part that a lot of people kind of miss, is that if there was a sacred drama enacted as part of the central part of the mystery, it wasn't just something that you watched. It was a full body, full souls, full every part of you experience. So that's one of the things that I suppose is disappointing about a lot of scholarship about this, is that a lot of people want to say, well, maybe they were ingesting psychedelic drugs and so forth. But really, if a ritual is good enough, you're not going to need the drugs. If the music is good enough, the dancing is good enough, the fasting, the long walk there, and all of those other things work out right, you're not going to need psychedelics.
And I think it's fair to say that many of the great philosophers, the great playwrights, the great statesmen of that ancient time, including some of the later Roman emperors, all claimed that they received great inspiration from the mysteries.
Oh, yes. In fact, the Emperor Hadrian is the only emperor that we know of who was initiated into the senior grade of the mysteries. So when you went the first time, you would become afterwards a mystes, an initiate. If you went the second time, though, which not as many people were able to do, you would become what's called an epoptes, which is one who has seen. And so he's one who very definitely got into it quite deeply, and is even said in certain sources to have founded similar mysteries in other places in honor of the Eleusinian mysteries. So it's definitely, Marcus Aurelius is another one who did it, and many major figures were involved.
And the Romans began, I suppose, developing some of their own mysteries.
Yeah, there are certainly parallel tracks, and the to what extent different cultists, and that is actually the plural of that as well. What extent different cultists developed their own mysteries as time went on? Oh, well, that cult down the road has a mystery tradition. We should probably have one as well. There were new mysteries coming about. In the 2nd century CE, one of the mystery traditions that cropped up that our only literary account of says was a complete chicanery, falsehood, charlatanry, was the mysteries of Glycon. And so it seems like something that could happen relatively easily and that interested people. Anyone who can say, I've done this and you haven't, neener, neener, neener. People always like things like that.
Well, I think the important thing in our contemporary era is that it's a way for people to become more ensouled. In the modern era, there's such a sense of people being disconnected from their own soul, and the ancients certainly had many, many ways to prevent or to avoid that.
Yes, definitely. I think that I think it's an error. It's often been said that, the whole process was just a psychological thing. I think it had psychological benefits. I think most spiritual practices have psychological benefits, but it's not just that. It's something on a much deeper level, unless you want to take psychological quite literally in terms of it's something that deeply affects the soul.
Well, P. Sufenas Virius Lupus, thank you once again for sharing this half hour with me.
Thank you very much. This has been wonderful.
It's been a great joy. And thank you for being with us.